I don't think we have proof that it's not going to be an episode of the Kardashians. True. Welcome to Brand Formula, a new podcast focused on the marketing and brands at play in Formula One today. I'm your host, Mordecai, and my co-host is Elyssa Margulis. Between us, we have 30 years of marketing experience, and we're also big F1 fans. Elyssa was raised on F1 from childhood, and I am a Drive to Survive COVID convert. Each week, we will break down the brand formulas of the advertising and marketing moves being made on and off the grid, the audience as it evolves across markets, and white spaces we think need to be covered. Who is seeing an ROI and who's DNF'd? Follow us where you follow, subscribe where you would subscribe. Now let's talk the brand formulas shaping F1 today. Welcome to Brand Formula. It is episode 12, and we had a race, we had a stop, we had a race, we had more DNFs this time. And as I said to you on text message, this was Mercurial Monaco. If ever a more definition of Mercury in retrograde, which I actually don't think it is, but you're still with me on the theme. That
absolutely.
What a Mercurial Monaco it was.
It really was. Monaco is one of two things. It's either boring and a bunch of cars just going around 2 miles over and over and over again in a line, or it's chaos embodied with absolutely complete unknowns. And I got to say, I kind of needed that. Needed a fun Monaco. We needed Lewis on a podium. You know, there was sad moments. There was happy moments. It gave us everything that F1 is meant to be. So I was here for it.
And we had a really good qualifying. Like, that was expertise to a T. And yes, really I'm speaking of a 19-year-old with that, but it was clinically beautiful.
Look, we're going to talk a lot of Kimi today, but even to see the back of the pack during quali, to see Max, Lewis, Charles, back to Isak, we even saw Cadillacs working some things out. So it was nice. I love this new generation of cars. I know there was a lot of radio talk about still issues and drivers being really upset about certain things with the cars, but we would never have had a Monaco like this without it. So I'm here for the changes.
Yeah, it was pretty great. I mean, I don't know if McLaren's battery issues are going to sort themselves out. Poor Lando. You know, we had a lot of George doing things. I think the fastest that George went was running to the stewards during the red flag. That was the fastest we saw George this weekend.
Well, I mean, that man will run to complain faster than my grandmother could complain about a dry matzo ball. That's all I'm saying.
What you have just said is a defining phrase. Like, that is. And then I love Bernie defined like what was going on with the speed penalties. And she was just like, there's no way you can remove them, but was also saying that it is a little vague how that works. And it was just ridiculous. I mean, we saw just as many speed penalties as we saw DNFs, basically. Crazy.
Yeah, it was a wild ride. And I will say, you know, when I watch a live race, I do get to watch the Sky Sports. And I was flipping a little bit between F1 and Sky Sports, a little bit in the beginning of the race before things got interesting. And I like that you get a little bit of different strategy talk on both sides. But I'm so glad that we have Bernie really being able to talk about strategy, because this was also a race where you saw a lot of really interesting and dynamic strategy calls being made in teams and things changing super fast, a lot of team play, driver swapping, which we have not really seen that much in the first 4 races. So to get that in Monaco is really cool, and have her be able to explain it in a way, whether you're technical or not, you understand.
Also, like, really called out what was going on with Russell in terms of when he would pit. And I was watching that play out because she said he's going to pit before he ends up behind Lawson. And she's seeing everything and just watching her genius. And then sure enough, he does. And that wasn't inferred from team radio. That's just her knowing the obvious. And I'm sure if you are an engineer, it was incredibly obvious. But I really love her insight. Also, just as a fun anecdote, we actually got community guidelines violated on TikTok because we had a great clip of when Bernie was talking about how great Lewis was doing. And then the Sky male commentators decided to say that it was because Kim was there this weekend. And she just made a total crack of like, well, that's, men for you kind of thing. And I'm misquoting, but well, I guess you'll try and have to find the clip elsewhere because we had to take it down on TikTok um, for it.
You know,
But
little violation never hurt, but I was slightly at least happy, maybe a little bit surprised that there wasn't as much Kim talk and as much showing Kim in the garage as I thought that there might be. There's a lot of social clips, but in terms of commentary live during practice, during quali, during the race, it was at least a little refreshing that we don't have to make this an episode of the Kardashians, but
well, I
she
don't
was
think I don't I
there.
don't think we have proof that it's not going to be an episode of the
True.
Kardashians.
Good
But
point. Good point.
I did, we do have to acknowledge because we've talked about Brand Kim coming into the sport, and I felt that she did handle it very well because I was nervous she wasn't even going to go out for the podium, and her behind the scenes it's like she had to find the middle, and I felt that she did. I felt like she was to the side, not the center of attention, but she was also a supportive friend.
100%. And look, we saw Lewis on a podium again. He had his mom the last time, he had Kim this time. So apparently, he needs the women in his life that support him to be at a race and he gets a podium. So if that means
Right.
Kim being there, his mom being there, doesn't matter to me. I appreciate and we have a lot of respect for him. And so I will respect the choices that he makes. And I think she really showed that she was humble. And I think she's a good person.
Yeah. I do wanna know what happened when the champagne went down, though, because if you couldn't tell on the podium, they all were spraying it out, and so some of
Protect
us
the
are
makeup.
curious.
Protect the makeup.
She was ready, she had the shades on, she must have been briefed, but, I wanted to also talk about not recapping so much in what we were watching, and it was his home race, but we also had such a moment of interesting brand loyalty and career choice in Charles I felt coming out of nowhere saying, I'm going to stick around longer. And I know we hear a lot of gossip, but when it reaches Sky News commentators making the statement, I feel like it has a little bit more validity to it. And Crofty had said that it was very much known that he had been approached by the team in green, which I don't think is an appealing option per se, but
Absolutely not.
I did find it very interesting that he made that decision because that will probably be, you know, a significant duration towards the end of his career that he's going to be at Ferrari, which obviously was the dream, but such a decision from a driver to stay and be in that space. And, it was full Ferrari. It felt like Ferrari's response to Gucci in a way. The leadership was kind of in the social media. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that as well.
It made a little bit of sense to me. It's his home race. He's the king of Monaco F1. He was doing well. I think that in his mind, it was probably an opportunity to kind of double down on the success that he's seen. So, it was just such a bummer that it just didn't end with that positive announcement ending in a double Ferrari podium. But I think it makes sense. I can't honestly imagine him anywhere else. I just think he embodies Ferrari and he's been there so long. He's weathered the ups and downs. He's now in this age of Lewis having a huge impact on team strategy, car, engineering, and he's seeing both the benefits and the negatives of that. And I think it shows a lot to say, I'm going to still stick around and I'm going to hope that I'm that world champion in red one day, even if maybe it's going to be Lewis first.
Does look like Lewis is in a good position, but I do think they are very equally mapped. So even though we're Lewis stands here, I don't see each race, I'm like, who's going to do it?
I would love to see
Yeah.
Charles win. And
Yeah.
and I do think from a brand perspective, he has built really an amazing individual driver brand that has been buoyed by being a Ferrari driver,
Mhm.
obviously. And I think extending that also extends his brand equity as an individual. It gives him more opportunity. There will always be a cachet to being a Ferrari driver that sets him up for an unbelievable long career far past being an actual driver. So,
Mhm.
pretty smart if you ask me.
Yeah, and he brings the whole family around. His wife has now had more brand deals, and someone has to be sponsoring the dog.
I was just about to say, if
Yeah,
Leo
yeah,
doesn't have a sponsorship, again, let us brainstorm. We have brand strategy for you. I can think of many multinational brands that should be sponsoring Leo for sure.
absolutely. So, for today's episode, we had talked earlier in the week about it, so it's not a direct response, but like we haven't talked about the momentous occasion that Kimi got his fifth win in a row today in Monaco. We are recording it pretty much right after the Grand Prix, but we had decided that we wanted to talk about this brand Kimi, and the inspiration for me wanting to talk about it was I saw this social post that was Kimmy's face, like, with cupped in his hands, like, perfect, basically like a four-year-old's pose for a school photo kind of thing. Do four-year-olds go to school? Yeah, well,
Yeah, kindergarten, kindergarten,
Sure, sure,
pre-K, something like that.
sure, but, and I was like, that was a choice to put him in that. But I think you really see three strong pillars coming up for Kimmy. And the first one, I think, is the reason that he has so much respect. And so when we look at brand Kimmy, we know that we are gravitating towards a worker. Like, he is an athlete, he is a racer, and you see that when you get that amazingly iconic podium from last time that we were talking about, but the level of respect that Lewis and Max in particular have for him, it is such a like for like, which we never really saw with Max and Lewis before. Mutual appreciation site. I feel like Kimmy is the glue bringing them together in some like racers kind of thing. And it's just so nice, I think, to see that respect. And that translates to us that he is working. And I think like Gabby Bortoletto has this as well with the support of Alonso and Verstappen. But obviously, Kimmy being number one in the world right now in the drivers' championship, and then just having this monumental occurrence of five in a row really just says more like he has the respect of champions because it is very clear to them that he has what it takes.
Yeah. And, to bring it back, it's really interesting. I was thinking a bit about this when we were deciding to talk brand Kimmy. If you go back and remember that Netflix worked directly with Toto to create a documentary called The Seat that was specifically around Kimmy stepping into Lewis's seat and taking this space at Mercedes and why and what that looked like. And it got me thinking about the fact that Kimmy is someone whose brand is kind of built around him versus built for him. And we were just talking about Charles as a really good example who has really built that brand by being at the center of it. Kimmy's brand started by people telling the story around him. And I don't think he knew at that time, obviously, because that documentary started before he even stepped onto the F1 grid, but it really set him up for where he's now moving in terms of building his brand and not relying on a ton of brand sponsorships on his own social media. He's allowing the stories to be built around so that he can really center on being on the track, being a winner, being a champion. And that's something that we haven't really seen necessarily because a lot of the drivers on the grid kind of came before this whole crazy social media world, or they came with it. And we talked a bit about that in our last episode. And he kind of had this unexpected entry, I think, into being a brand, which I hadn't really thought and realized until we really prepped for this episode. And I think it's kind of fascinating. And there's a lot of parallels to even consumer brands in what we always talk about of world building and really thinking about who you are within the context of the different types of stories that you tell and where they get told.
Yeah, and everyone isn't going to get the Netflix show, but that is definitely Toto going, this is the brand formula to make a superstar. This is the brand formula that made Formula One so popular. This is how we bring something new forward. We do a long form series. And I don't think it's limited to that, but it is what we're seeing just in the marketplace for jobs, that it is storytelling first. It is, can you narrate this? Can you translate this technology, this brand, this personality to folks? And what a disconnect, as you point out, like people who came in with social, and you can see it, like you have the great social content. We talked about it with like Lawson, and you have it with Lindblad. I think Isaac has good social content, and they're kind of sorting their brands out. And then the archaic way of just, oh, I have to have a spot on social, which is what the Lance Stroll was, but not having a narrative. Like Lance has no narrative, and we're not going to go back to last episode, but I do think that Toto is one of the best leaders. I thought it was a really big deal that on Sky, he said that he hadn't been on the podium in 10 years and that he had gone and done that. I think that's a huge statement.
Huge. I thought him stepping on that and next to Lewis and just the visual of that past into the present. And we talked a bit about this of seeing Max, Lewis, and Kimi on the podium together last week. And now we're seeing a bit of the same story, different chapter of Toto standing there and the choice of that. And it does go back to that brand formula, to also a bit of the hierarchy of what it means to build the brand of Mercedes, build the brand of Mercedes drivers, and build the brand of Toto as the leader of those things, and where he's chosen to become part of that brand story or to be ancillary to that brand story. This weekend was definitely a bit of a shift, and we haven't, to your point, kind of seen him truly step into that since the Seat documentary, where he really introduced Kimi. It was his protege, it was his chance to get this right, having missed out on Max in the past, and now to be able to be the leader of that next generation and make that investment in someone that he saw the future of. It's really fascinating. And I'd love to see a second part of the Mercedes specific story around this season. And I'm worried about what Drive to Survive is actually going to do around this brand story. I really like how Mercedes is telling it themselves, how Toto is choosing to be a part of it, Kimi's place in it, his own social. So this whole weekend, I thought, kind of like a producer, okay, all of those Netflix directors that are on site shooting for Drive to Survive this weekend are piecing together these stories that are going to impact these individual brands that are owned by the drivers, owned by the teams. And I really hope they get this one right.
And we're talking about this pillar of the athlete and this importance of story. And I actually was having a conversation on LinkedIn with some luxury fashion people in the comments. And the conversation began about the fact that several luxury fashion houses have hired new CEOs that have been promotions from the chief communications officer. So I joined the chat because I said, I understand, yes, with luxury fashion, again, story first being such a priority for brands. But I said, I'd also look at the luxury sport of Formula One, because Bradley Lord, who's deputy principal now, so the person that would fill Toto's shoes, was the chief communications officer for years. And so again, you have story first leadership going into that space, the people that know how to handle the crisis moments, not just, I mean, we're marketers, so we're not chief communications officers in any way, but like that added nuance of being able to make quick decisions and handle the brand and that PR is such a top priority, that you're seeing this movement of story leaders of that ilk become the overall leader. And I just thought it was an interesting parallel, because I didn't know that that was happening in luxury fashion because I'm not deep in it. And then I was like, how funny, because we're obviously deep in on F1 and we're like, and we see it there. And we had just been talking about luxury as a brand with it. So that's my side anecdote, but I think it was important.
Yeah, It's interesting because I mean, when you and I talk a lot about the CMO path, and that's another place, there the lines are getting very blurred between marketing, communications, leadership. So you're seeing some of these roles that sometimes now the financial teams are reporting into CMOs. CMOs are in charge of both the data, the analytics, the money. That same thing is kind of happening on this F1 side, which is kind of interesting, is collapsing the ownership of some of these main brand pillars under traditionally a role that had been purely about coming up with the best story. And so we know communications is very much about solving crises many, many days. And that is very much what being a team principal is. You're just solving different kinds of crises and you're solving
Mhm.
them in very, very fast turnaround. So it'll be an interesting to see how that manifests.
Yeah, and just like because we're just like Kimmy the worker, Kimmy the athlete, Kimmy the racer, Bradley Lord was right next to Toto. The whole, like, even if you don't know who we're talking about, any shot of Toto watching a race, you will see him next to him. So, like, that is the journey. And one of the things about Kimmy as this worker, athlete, and racer pillar is like, he's always learning. He is, he had really bad starts in the beginning, and you can see that he's improving. He takes his sportsmanship super serious. And I just, you can see the respect just translates. It sort of just oozes off of him now. I mean, I don't think last year I would have called Kimmy on a podium iconic, and I do
No,
now.
and for that to happen in a year is really, really an amazing rise. And sometimes you forget how young he is and how fast this is all happening. But we've talked a bit about this and in corporate America, and you bring up LinkedIn. So we see this a lot in LinkedIn. It's discussed a lot in the leadership circles that we're in. Is this next generation? Is how is Gen Z going to impact the workplace? How is Gen Z going to impact brand storytelling? How are they going to impact consumerism? There's a lot of unknowns in terms of how we're going to see this next generation come up and come through. They're all going to be our bosses at some point. And it's been very refreshing. There's a lot of a bit more negative talk that, as my Gen Zer would say, her generation is cooked. They don't work as hard. They have AI to rely on. They grew up on their phones. And so we just don't see them putting as much effort out as maybe the generation prior. But let's not forget that we also said millennials were the laziest. So maybe just we all think we're the best and then everyone after us, which is a problem in and of itself. I digress. Point being that Timmy is representing this next generation and he's doing it with such grace. He's doing it with vulnerability. He is, like we say in business, building in public. He is really being honest about himself, his struggles, how he's getting to where he is. He's humble when he wins and he's honest when he doesn't. And that is a really amazing thing to see. Is we've seen some of the younger drivers that have come in with a bit more self-serving storytelling and gravitas that was not earned. And Kimmy went a different path. And I really, really love that we're seeing that as a once in a generation talent and all that. But aside from the talent, it is a once in a generation story. And it's something that he is really owning and being very true to himself. So I hope that inspires everybody, not just in F1, but outside of it.
But then also, take that into pillar number 2, which is that he is a teenager. He is a youth. He is playful. He is humble as well. And we see that. We see all the social media content of him pranking different team members. And I find that to be also just really wonderful, especially as you talk about generationally. Like, I just always think, the worst thing that, and we're not having a psychoanalysis here, but I think the worst thing we can do is grow up too fast, and what a position
Mhm.
he's in to kind of grow up too fast. And the fact that they let him and embrace him being a kid. Bono may have to literally duct tape his rain jacket to him if Kimmy has but I think there's a beauty in that we talked in an early episode about when he cried after his first win, and he was different than Lando. Like, he didn't apologize for it. He was like, I'm gonna cry. And it's like, he's gonna cry. He's a teenager, but he's also a man. A young man, but he is. And it was just his humbleness to the space, his willingness to be a son on the grid, to be a mentee to Toto, to be a worker on the team and just be under Bono's tutelage. Like, you just really, to watch him play is just very endearing to his brand of no, but he's still a kid. And that doesn't demean him, but we celebrate it.
And we can't forget, there's been a lot of kids on the F1 track. That is especially in this kind of newer generation, you're coming on as teenagers, young adults, and the pressure that that puts on you and the people that you have to have around you to maintain that kind of humbleness and maintain that kind of sense of self is huge. And it's amazing to see. And I always said, go back, remember his mom was driving him to school a year ago. That is just crazy to remember as he is crossing these finish lines.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I see him in like Mercedes ads and I'm like, he just got a driver's license, like, regular driving license. But, and this is just to show a difference. But if I was to look at the grid as sort of the opposite of what we're talking about, and something that I don't see is I feel like I love him so much. I don't want to like sound like I'm picking on him, but I think it's been robbed of the pillars of Ollie Beerman. I don't think he's been allowed to be a kid. I think when he came in, it was like, you have to adult now, as he was filling in. And okay, you did good job. And I feel like he is an example of someone that is equally young, not as young as Kimi, but has had to be an adult too early, I think, in the way they brand him, the way they comms him, the way he's treated on the grid when he too is a kid.
And it begs the question if it would be different if he was winning 5 in a row and how he would be treated. And is Kimi getting to be a little bit more himself because he's proving it and he's showing it? And you hear a little bit of that in his radio messages with Bono when Bono's trying to calm him down and get him to chill. And he's like, no, let me go. And sometimes you do. You're not going to convince a teenager to not do something. Trust me, as the mom of one, I will be taking Bono's advice as much as I can. So on the flip side, Ollie is in a midfield, backfield car, and there's a lot more pressure on him. They know that he's not going to be at the front. It's going to have to work harder. So I think a bit about that, even in a brand positioning perspective. If you're not in the winning brand, if you're a challenger brand, your strategy has to be a little bit different. Your communication has to be a little bit different. And you're seeing that play out with some of the other younger drivers as they're just not in the same place that Kimi is.
Yeah, absolutely. But, we're talking about these pillars because this is where you drive your brand story from, your sponsorships. And so here we have, just as a recap, the worker, athlete, racer pillar, the youthful play, humble naivete that Kimi has. And coming up, bright and shiny, third pillar, he is Italian as Italian come. When I saw his father hand him the flag again, so that the second he wins, he's got the Italian flag on. How fantastic. How he was driving through the streets of Italy over the 1 week break we had. But really, it's those Italian pillars of loyalty, faith, and family are at the forefront of Kimi's brand and what this brand Kimi is. And not just like, I do mean that, like, you see the family in the shots. Obviously, his father is quite involved and around, but that's not unique to Kimi. There's lots of dads that are around, but the prayers are up, family and photos, give me the flag, and he sings the anthem, which a lot of the drivers do not do.
And look, he's the first Italian to win Monaco was before he was born, a year before he was even born.
22 years.
So 22, right. I don't do maths. We're marketing people. We're not math people. 22 years. He's 19 years old. You do the math, listeners. But that is part of identity. He's a brand ambassador for an entire country. I go back if you're not familiar, but he was left off the poster for Imola, the Italian race. Huge. Oh my gosh, everyone up in arms because, how do you put Liam Lawson on a poster for Imola and not put the Italian boy is beyond me, and could definitely go on a rant that might get us kicked off TikTok again. So we'll leave it there. But that's kind of F1 failing marketing. You know that is the person that represents the country that's going to get fans to be a part of your brand, to show up. You don't make that mistake. So him embracing his Italianness is also a huge asset to Formula One, to the FIA from a marketing perspective, that they need to find where that intersection is between him as an Italian driver and F1 as a sport. Because you have Ferrari representing an entire country without Italian drivers in those seats. And then you have an Italian driver basically representing an entire sport because he happens to be Italian. And that's a really interesting brand story marketing conundrum that I don't think F1 has figured out for itself.
Yeah, this is why, it's a simple thing that we're walking through today, these like three pillars of what Kimi's narrative is and, what he's putting out there. But the reason this is created is this is a fast moving marketplace. This is a fast moving world that we are in. And you have to vet the different deals that are coming through, the different ways that people are approaching you, and you have to have quick answers for how you're going to do that. So this is work that I think, since we're kind of joking about LinkedIn and the participation there, every executive leadership coach, I'm sure there's a free course premium members of LinkedIn can take to have your pillars, because it's like, if you don't know who you're going to be in market, then you're going to fail. You're going to be grabbing at straws. And when you're grabbing at straws, you don't have a sense of self and you're too at risk of what is going to happen to you on the grid. And so it is so important to take the simple time to just really evaluate, who am I? And like you pointed out, let's tell the story around Kimi. Let's not force a story. And I remember being worried that they were forcing a story when, and I don't mean to poison this moment, because the journey here is that I realized that was honest, but was when Kimi went to Senna's grave. I was like, what is this? Is this a photo moment? Like, this is really weird. But now I understand, like, now it's been fully explained. I understand he has a deep connection that he feels, and you see it throughout. It's had multiple touch points in his journey. And I just think that that's so important, that all of that always come through as true, that we know we don't need to know everything about a person, but it is nice to see it. As you said, there's a lot of catchphrases being thrown around Kimi right now. I mean, watching the Sky broadcast, if I heard generational talent one more time, I mean, I feel like the two things that the Sky broadcast made a commitment to was Kimi is a generational talent and George has got this. It's not showing, but he's got this.
I'm going to remain quiet because otherwise we're going to spend 10 minutes on our thoughts, feelings, and opinions. But it goes back to, and again, I know we discussed a little bit in the last episode, but Kimi goes dark on social during race weekends. And that happened because there was not very positive things being thrown around him last year. There was death threats and really, really negative comments that were happening on his social media. And he chose to go dark. He chose to say, I'm not going to put this story out. I'm not going to respond to this. And so I think it's been kind of fascinating to see that as a choice when you are building your own brand story and you're kind of allowing other people to decide what those titles are going to be, what those stories are going to be. He's not on social calling himself a once in a generational talent. He's actually not saying anything. And that is louder than saying something. And I really, really appreciate that he's able to do that, because it in a way takes back some ownership that maybe you don't have when you're trying to control your own narrative so much.
Yeah. We often say when we get into this subject matter, we're not a gossip podcast, and I'm not interested in the gossip side because he's just too young and precious. But he did have a girlfriend for a little bit that was public. And this is what I mean by we're not, I don't know the status of their relationship, and it's not my business. So we're going to let that be, but he has pulled it out of the narrative. So she has not been seen on the grid and that kind of thing. And there was this moment that he was kind of like, again, this almost adulting, like, I'm going to have, my girlfriend there too. And I feel like it was probably smart that he just pulled that out of the narrative. It was causing too much distraction. Was something I saw was quite intentional because she had been at a few races and then we didn't see her anymore. And um, I just hope everyone's loved all around.
Well,
However,
Kimmy, if you're looking for a girlfriend, I know some Gen Z Brooklyn teenagers that would love to give you a little FaceTime date. So call me up.
well, we just got a lot of races coming up, so it'll be exciting to see. I mean, are we going to witness something we've never seen before? Quite possibly. He really is just
Yeah.
doing it. So there was a lot of pressure
Yeah.
on Monaco, and he has shown up. It's pretty great. So I think that's our dozen in the bank. That's episode
Can't believe
12.
it. 12.
12. I believe in a baker's
Next week,
dozen.
I was about to say next week is a
Yay.
baker's dozen.
Yeah.
So we'll hold off for the lucky number 13. Barcelona, always a fun race. I love the Barcelona track. I love the fans there.
Mhm.
It's always been a race that I want to go to as well. So one
Yes.
week.
1 week, literally. So, thank you all for listening. We are Brand Formula, an F1 marketing podcast, here every week ish to break down the formulas and brands around F1, teams, drivers, and the FIA, here and there. But follow us wherever you follow, do your social things. We're Brand Formula at Brand Formula Pod, wherever you do those things. And please tell a friend, put a like somewhere, and we would appreciate it. We're building up all of those channels and things. So thank you for listening. Goodbye for now, and lights out.
Lights out.